In 1943, the Luftwaffe still believed it ruled the skies over Europe. The Messerschmitt Bf 109 and Focke-Wulf 190 were fast, maneuverable, and battle-proven. Against them, the Americans had introduced a new fighter, the Republic P-47 Thunderbolt. When German pilots first saw the Thunderbolt, they laughed. Compared to the sleek Bf 109, the P-47 looked bloated, heavy, and clumsy. Its fuselage was wide, its radial engine oversized, its frame massive. Luftwaffe intelligence briefings even described it as a flying barrel. Too heavy to climb, too slow to dogfight, one squadron leader told his men. If you see one, turn inside it and it will never follow. That was the belief, and for a brief moment it seemed true. Early Thunderbolts struggled at altitude, climbing sluggishly. German pilots mocked them in after-action reports. To the Luftwaffe, the P-47 was nothing more than a lumbering mistake. But they had underestimated two things: American industry and American firepower, the design that made no sense. The Thunderbolt was the heaviest single-engine fighter of the war. Fully loaded, it weighed nearly 8 tons. It carried a massive Pratt & Whitney R2800 double Wasp radial engine, the same engine used in bombers. German pilots who first encountered it in France reported back with derision. "It wallows like a cow," one ace wrote. "A 109 can dance circles around it." And they were right. At low speed and tight turns, the 109 could outmaneuver the Thunderbolt. The Luftwaffe had built its reputation on such dogfights. They assumed that advantage would hold. But the Americans had designed the Thunderbolt for something else entirely: high-altitude escort and overwhelming firepower. First blood. In April 1943, the 56th Fighter Group flew its first combat mission in Thunderbolts over Europe. German radar picked them up, and Bf 109s scrambled to intercept. When the two groups clashed, German pilots dove confidently. They expected easy kills. But as they opened fire, something shocking happened. The P-47s absorbed hit after hit and kept flying. The Thunderbolt's armor was thick, its radial engine rugged. Cannon shells that would cripple a 109 barely slowed it. Pilots reported returning home with holes in their wings, cylinders shot out, even entire control surfaces damaged, yet still airborne. And when the P-47s turned their guns, the real surprise came. 8 .50 calibers, most fighters carried 2 to 4 machine guns. The Thunderbolt carried 8, Browning M2 50 caliber machine guns, 4 in each wing. Together they could unleash 100 rounds per second. German pilots who once laughed now found themselves flying into a storm of lead. One burst could shred a fighter. A sustained burst could cut a bomber in half. An American pilot later described it. "You didn't aim for a plane. You aimed in its direction and pressed the trigger. The guns did the rest." Luftwaffe veterans, accustomed to quick duels, were stunned. The first time a formation of Thunderbolts opened fire, survivors reported the sky itself seemed to tear apart. Shock. Over Europe, by mid-1943, the mocking tone in German reports had vanished. Instead, complaints mounted. "Do not underestimate the P-47, one squadron leader warned. Its firepower is devastating. Do not attack from the front. Do not linger in range." Yet avoiding range was almost impossible. The Thunderbolt might be heavy, but in a dive it was unmatched. Its weight gave it speed. Pilots learned to climb high above enemy formations, then dive like hawks. Few German planes could outrun that plunge. One Luftwaffe ace who survived such an encounter wrote bitterly, "The cow becomes a falcon when it dives." By late 1943, the 56th Fighter Group, the first to master the Thunderbolt, had become the highest-scoring unit in the U.S. Army Air Forces. Its pilots, like Francis Gabby Gabreski and Robert Johnson, racked up dozens of kills. Johnson once limped home in a Thunderbolt with more than 200 holes in its frame. German pilots who had emptied their guns into him swore he must have been shot down. Instead, he landed safely, climbed out, and said simply, "The jug can take it." Word spread quickly. The plane they had laughed at was proving nearly indestructible. For us in the Luftwaffe, the laughter ended. The P-47 was no joke. It was a monster, and its 850s were rewriting the rules of the air war. The sky over occupied France in the summer of 1943 was no longer the playground of the Luftwaffe. For years, German pilots had grown used to diving at lumbering bombers, scattering their formations and engaging escort fighters on favorable terms. The arrival of the Thunderbolt began to change that balance. At first, we still believed our Messerschmitts and Focke-Wulfs could outfly the American plane. In tight turns, in sudden climbs, we still had the advantage. But war is rarely fought on paper. It is fought in sudden, chaotic moments when strengths reveal themselves. And the P-47 had strengths none of us had expected. The first real shock came during an escort mission for B-17 bombers bound for targets deep in France. The German fighters rose in waves to meet them, confident as ever. We believed the Thunderbolts would scatter easily once pressed, leaving the bombers exposed. Instead, we found ourselves unable to break through. Each time we approached the formation, the Thunderbolts unleashed streams of fire so dense it seemed the air itself had turned lethal. The sound of 8 Brownings firing in unison carried across the sky like tearing canvas, a rolling thunder that made even experienced pilots flinch. I remember diving on a bomber and seeing a Thunderbolt wheel toward me. I thought to simply twist away, confident my Messerschmitt would leave it behind. But as I rolled, tracers arced across the sky, bright as burning needles slicing past my canopy. A burst clipped my tail and shook the whole aircraft. I barely escaped, heart pounding, realizing how wide the Thunderbolt's cone of fire truly was. It did not need precision. Sheer volume did the work. Reports from other squadrons confirmed it. The Thunderbolt's guns shredded planes with terrifying ease. Pilots spoke of comrades disappearing in a single pass, their machines ripped apart by weight of fire. The old tactics of darting in and out no longer worked. To linger in range of a Thunderbolt was suicide. Yet the most demoralizing quality of the new fighter was not its firepower, but its resilience. American pilots came back from missions with aircraft peppered by holes that should have sent them tumbling into the ground. Engines coughed, wings tore, but the P-47 still made it home. One German crew poured round after round into a Thunderbolt, only to watch it keep flying, smoke trailing, its pilot unshaken. To fight such a machine was to feel your own weapons had become useless. American strategy adapted quickly. The Thunderbolts did not dogfight in the old style. They used altitude, diving from high above with astonishing speed. Their heavy frames gave them momentum no German fighter could match. A jug in a dive was a predator. By the time you saw it, it was already firing. Many Luftwaffe pilots never had the chance to recover. By autumn, the name Thunderbolt carried a new weight. The laughter was gone from the barracks. Briefings no longer dismissed the plane as a clumsy mistake. Instead, warnings were issued. Avoid head-on attacks, beware its dive, never underestimate its range. But even those warnings proved insufficient. For in 1943 and 1944, the Thunderbolts began escorting bombers deeper into German territory, and with them came a tide that could not be stopped. For German pilots, the psychological toll was immense. Once we had been hunters, feared and respected. Now we were prey, driven back by machines that seemed unbreakable. Even aces with dozens of victories found themselves humbled. The sky itself felt different when Thunderbolts roared above, their engines growling like storms. I still recall one mission when we scrambled to intercept a bomber stream. From a distance we saw the silver shapes of B-17s glinting in the sun, flanked by smaller forms. As we closed, we realized the escorts were Thunderbolts, flying tight, disciplined formations. We pressed in, desperate to break the wall, but every attempt was met with torrents of fire. 2 of our fighters were shredded in seconds. I escaped only by diving through cloud cover, heart hammering, ears still ringing with the thunder of their guns. That day, our commander admitted aloud what none of us wanted to say. The Americans have found their champion. From then on, the sky belonged less to us and more to the Jug, that ungainly, indestructible beast we once mocked. The laughter had turned to silence, and silence, in war, is the sound of respect born from fear. The winter skies of 1944 carried a new sound. It was deeper, heavier, less sharp than the high whine of our Messerschmitts. At first it rumbled faintly on the horizon, and then it swelled until it drowned out everything else. The Thunderbolts had arrived again, climbing high above the contrails of the bombers, circling like armoured hawks. We had learned to recognise that sound with dread. It meant the next minutes would decide whether you survived another day, or became smoke and metal falling to earth. What once seemed like a joke had become an ever-present nightmare. The P-47 had matured in tactics and in confidence. The Americans no longer hesitated to send them, deep into German skies. We knew that when the bombers came, they would not come alone. The Jugs were there, weaving patterns above and around, patient, waiting to dive. We tried to cling to old habits, swift turns, vertical climbs, sudden breaks, but the Thunderbolt could meet us on its terms. If you tried to climb above, its engine roared it higher. If you tried to dive away, its bulk turned into a meteor that outpaced you. There was no simple escape. Worse than the manoeuvring was the curtain of fire. I saw men who had once been confident aces disintegrate in bursts that lasted less than 2 seconds. 8 heavy guns spat such volume that there was no space left in the air to hide. Tracers burned through sky, and then through wings, fuel tanks, cockpits. Entire formations were broken by just a handful of Thunderbolts diving in from the sun. Survivors spoke of seeing comrades vanish without warning, their planes shorn apart like paper caught in a storm. By 1944, the Allied bombing campaign had intensified. Berlin, Hamburg, Dresden, our cities shook under endless waves. The Luftwaffe tried desperately to punch holes in those streams of bombers, but the Thunderbolts were the shield. I remember one mission where we launched 20 fighters to strike a group of fortresses over Leipzig. We lost 7 aircraft before even reaching the bombers. The P-47s had spotted us early, dove as one, and scattered us like frightened birds. The bombers flew on untouched. Even the ground crews began to feel the shift. Reports filtered through that Thunderbolts were strafing airfields, rail yards, convoys. The same firepower that had humbled us in the air was now turned downward in devastating sweeps. Trains exploded in fireballs, trucks burned, and runways were cratered by relentless attack. The Jug was not just a fighter. It had become a weapon of terror across the front. The story spread quickly. One pilot returned to base shaken, his aircraft riddled with holes. He swore he had fired everything he had at a Thunderbolt that simply would not fall. He saw the pilot inside, calm, firing back with a storm of bullets. He barely escaped, convinced that the Jug itself was invincible. Another squadron reported being ambushed by Thunderbolts hidden in cloud cover. They dove through mist like predators, killing 3 aircraft in seconds. It was no longer arrogance we felt. It was resignation. Our tactics manuals grew thicker with warnings. Never engage head-on, never allow them altitude, never remain in their range. But in practice, these rules meant nothing. In war, you cannot choose perfect conditions. You take the fight that comes, and when that fight came against a Thunderbolt, you almost always lost. There were moments of defiance, of course. Skilled pilots could still outmaneuver a Jug at low altitude, twisting beneath its heavy frame and slipping behind. A few victories gave us fleeting pride. But for each one of those, there were 10 more of our comrades shot down. The balance was not just against us, it was overwhelming. The Americans seemed to have endless numbers. You would shoot one down and 5 more appeared. Even if you escaped one dogfight, the next day brought another. Our fuel dwindled, our aircraft thinned, Our pilots grew younger and less trained. Theirs only grew stronger. The P-47 squadrons swelled, and each new arrival seemed more confident than the last. I still remember the first time I saw Robert Johnson's story printed in an Allied leaflet. He had returned from combat with his aircraft torn by more than 200 holes, yet he had landed safely. At first I dismissed it as propaganda, but later even our own intelligence confirmed it. The Thunderbolt could fly home through storms of fire that would have killed any other fighter. Against such resilience, our chances were illusions. By the final months of the war, the laughter that once greeted the Thunderbolt's shape had been replaced by a G-rim nickname whispered among pilots. We called it the Juggernaut. It was not elegant, not beautiful, not something you admired, but it was unstoppable. Every burst from its guns carried death. Every dive scattered our formations. Every mission reminded us that industry, not style, would decide the sky. When I was finally grounded, ordered to instruct new pilots rather than fly, I watched the next generation climb into cockpits with fear already in their eyes. They had not even faced the Jug yet, but they had heard the stories. They knew what awaited them. To send them aloft felt like sending boys into a storm with paper shields. Many did not return. In May 1945, when Germany finally surrendered, I felt no surprise. The war had been lost long before. The day we first underestimated the Thunderbolt was the day we condemned ourselves. The P-47 was proof of what American industry could create, a fighter that did not need to be graceful, only deadly and unbreakable. It rained lead in torrents, and in doing so, it broke the back of the Luftwaffe. Years later, when I tried to explain the war to those who asked, I did not begin with tanks or with battles on the ground. I spoke of the sound that haunted us, the deep roar of a Jug diving, the thunder of 8 Brownings firing, the sudden silence when another comrade's voice vanished from the radio. We had laughed once at the Thunderbolt. We did not laugh for long. And that is how I remember it, not as a joke, not as a mistake, but as the machine that taught us humility. In the end, it was not just a fighter. It was a storm made of steel and fire, and it rained down until the war was finished.